Carly. Good evening. Thank you for coming out to hear about the Wayland Newspaper Project. We have Sue Flicop, Chris Hill, Carole Plumb, June Valliere, and Dave Watkins here to share their project with us. I'm Courtney at the library. If you have any questions, we are recording for Waycam and our YouTube page, so you'll be able to rewatch and share. And if you're joining us on Zoom, please put your questions in the chat, and I'll raise my hand and read them out loud. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Sue Flicop, and I want to thank Courtney and the Wayland Free Public Library for letting us present to you tonight. They've been very supportive, and we really appreciate that. We are a group of 5 people who have been, there we go. We have an agenda that we're going to cover tonight, hopefully in succinct amount of time. We're going to talk about who we are and what our mission is. We're going to talk a little bit about Wayland and the newspaper history, which some of you might be aware of, but we'll update you. We have the results of the newspaper survey that we did in the spring that we'll be presenting, as well as the future of what our plans are for a Wayland newspaper, including how we're going to fund it. And then if you can all save your questions till the end, that would be really helpful, and then we'll stay as long as we need to. So we are a group of 5 up here. Sue Flicop, Chris Hill is at the end, Carole is right here, June Valliere, and Dave Watkins. And we've been meeting all summer to review the results of the survey and to plan what we're going to do moving forward. So we'll introduce ourselves as we go along, because we each have a part of the presentation. A little bit about me. I am a fairly new Wayland resident. I've only been here since 2020. I lived in Newton for almost 20 years before then, was very active in Newton life. My very first job out of college was working as an ad coordinator at North Shore Weeklies, which was a group of about 11 papers on the North Shore. And then it was my very favorite job ever in my life, actually, an ad coordinator. And then I moved to be a sales rep for newspaper advertising in the Marblehead and Swampscott area. And then life sort of took me somewhere else. But I always go back to my newspaper roots. So we also wanted to thank this large group of people who are listed. They were people who helped us in the winter and the spring prepare for their presentation. We met, I think, mostly by Zoom, and then people were also very helpful in handing out information about our survey. We also had a number of community groups that were very helpful in getting the word out, adding links to their communications with their members. So we wanted to be sure and thank everybody who helped us get that survey done. And then just to start out with our mission, this is what we've been working on for the most of the summer. We ended up with this statement. It's still a work in progress, as I think a newspaper will always be. Our mission is to unify the Wayland community by providing a central source of local news, which is unbiased and covers many facets of local life, including government, cultural, and social facets, in both print and digital. So we're going to be presenting to you sort of our argument for our plans. And next is Carole Plumb.
Okay, the chair's not rolling. We're going this way. Hi, my name is Carole Plumb. I am a product of the Wayland school system, and my dad took me to my first town meeting. I tagged along with him when I was a senior in high school. I have been a spectator and a participant in many board meetings back when they were actually held in person, and I am so grateful that a lot of times you can still go to Zoom now because I can do it from the comfort of my home. Is that better? Yeah. Okay, sorry. I volunteered for our Wayland Newspaper Project because of that boots-on-the-ground experience I had in small D democracy, going to all those board meetings. And I learned that there's so many interlocking parts that it takes to have a thriving, functioning government and community. And there's a lot of things that people don't give a lot of thought to, like the who, what, when, and where of staying current on what's going on within your town. And we're all counting on somebody else to take care of things, and then we're surprised when it turns out that was sort of wishful thinking. To be a community, we need to have a shared story about who we are, and granted, different people are going to have slightly different slants on it, But a community exists when you have the sum of everyone's efforts is greater than those individual parts, and that sum of effort, that trust in other people, that's the public good. And if you probably aren't practicing democracy if you're not walking away from some of these meetings grumbling because you didn't get what you wanted. And to have an encompassing consensus within a group of people, you need to have informed citizens who really understand the issues and the history. And so it comes down to, what does your community really want or need to know in order to have a consensus or get to consensus? It's we're not going to spend all our time thinking about taxes or what's going on in town hall. We also, as news, we want to know what our friends and neighbors are doing and what's coming up next, for events. And you also want to know where to find services and goods to solve your problems and stoke your interests and your passions. This is the glue that holds you together, right, as a community. And this is where we have to go to business advertisers. They were the ones that pay for the news, and they're because it's a conduit to their customers, which is us. And this model, this is like the legacy print newspaper's business model. And that model held up pretty well for the Wayland Town Crier from 1949 during the boom years, all the way up to when it also added the digital function, and then until it was switched over entirely to digital on May 5th, 2022. And when Gannett Media switched over to digital-only distribution, branded as Wicked Local. And I'm just curious, just show of hands, does anybody actually look at the Wicked Local page? We got one. Okay, good. Two. Okay. And so, if you were reading the Town Crier during the print Town Crier during that transition time, you could see the page counts dropping. It went from 2 town reporters to 1 town reporter to 1 reporter covering multiple towns, which is really not your news quality is going down. And then when Gannett shut down the Town Crier, it also revoked all digital access to the prior years. So a private equity company now holds your local news history, and it's as intellectual property, and it has locked you out, which is not something I'm happy about. So if you're a community, how do you tell what your shared reality is if you can't even recall and remember your past by looking stuff up? We also saw during COVID that the town has a really uneven reach to the residents who need services and for communicating emergency protocols. So the need for news is definitely still there, and we need to get better at it. As part of our discussions, we finally came up with the most effective way we thought to contact all 5,380 households in roughly the same time window is to use postal mail, and while maintaining a digital presence as well. And when we looked around, I don't know, are we up to one more slide? Yeah. What we found is that there's a broad swath out there of do-it-yourself taking place across the whole country for rebuilding local journalism. And the business models range from like a labor of love solo operation like the Sudbury Weekly. So you got nonprofits, you got for-profits, you have public benefit companies, and there are organizations that have been put together by former newspaper employees or like motivated citizens. Some are with and without financial sponsors. Some have advertising, some don't. And the quality of the content and the publishing times are also all over the map. So what we're seeing on that list is, it's Ellen Clegg and Dan Kennedy had written a book, and what they also had to do is keeping track of all the local news that's out in Massachusetts. So you can see that they found that there are 351 cities, at least 242 have some kind of local news. But again, that quality content is like all over the place. Some of them are blogs, and some of them are actually, as we say, like the Metro West Daily News is more of a traditional newspaper. And I thought one of the things we kind of worked our way down to for our model is, let me just kind of tell you that what's the same about them is they have editors, they have at least a editor, and reporters, and they're paid, which is good. So the first Concord Bridge and the Provincetown Independent are weeklies, and obviously the Metro West Daily News is a daily. That the Metro West Daily News is a for-profit that's owned by Gannett, and it has all the traditional elements of the paper, and it's mostly regional. Whereas if you look at the Provincetown Independent, as a weekly, it's a Massachusetts Benefit Corporation, which gives it a different kind of business model. It's regional for the Cape. It has subscriptions, and it has shareholders, which is the whole different part of the model. And it also can take donations through as a nonprofit. And if you look at what else? So the one I think we like the best is the Concord Bridge, because it's the closest thing we think we can get to. It has the digital and a print version. Actually, all of these have a digital and print version. And it runs with local articles, and it was put together by the local people that are the townspeople that are there, along with a lot of funding. And I'm going to hand it over and let June talk about our survey.
Hi, I'm June Valliere. Many years ago, I was a journalism major, and shortly after graduating from college, I wrote for 2 different weeklies, but then I, too, moved on to a different career, more lucrative. You know, I feel strongly about newspapers, particularly local newspapers, playing an important role in community. I moved here 8 years ago, and when you don't have children in a school system, you're not connected to a community. I worked in Boston, long hours. I lived in a condo community where people like myself. And it wasn't until I retired a few years ago and joined the League of Women Voters that I even found out that there were some other news sources in town, like Wayland E-News and Wayland Voters Network. And, you know, the days of the welcome lady are gone, and we need a newspaper to welcome people. So we started out the project by doing a survey. Sue and Chris created a website to house the questions and for people to access. And a group of us approached different organizations in town, asking officers if they could disseminate the link to our survey. Some of us stood in front of the high school before town meeting, passing out our link. Some other people went to the town dump. We also left QR codes at the library and various places. As a result of that, we received 378 responses. The purpose of the survey was, 1, to determine if there's any interest in town to develop a newspaper, and 2, what people were interested in seeing. As you'll see, 94% of the respondents felt that community news was important. And our next question was, where were people getting their local news? We found the most popular sites were the Wayland Patch, Wayland E-News, Town of Wayland website, and community news on Facebook. And format people preferred, 77.1% said an email newsletter, 49.5% said website, and 43.3% said paper. And what topics do you believe people are it's important to local news? And, you know, what stood out is, you know, some of the things we're talking about was news about an analysis of local issues, town government calendar and updates, and regional news. And then you'll notice the others are just what you expect to see in a newspaper. We also asked people to comment on other items that we might not have mentioned in the survey, and people listed climate and environmental and local programs, election news resulting from town board, local business happenings, local feel-good stories, historical stories. And the big question was, will you be willing to pay for a weekly subscription? Excuse me. And 85% of the respondents said yes, they would. Then we asked them how much they'd be willing to pay, And they responded with $25 to $100 a year. Another approach we took was, if the newspaper was free, would you donate any money? And again, we got a similar response. 87% said they would be willing to donate, basically somewhere between $50 and $100 per year. You'll see that 97.9% of the respondents were Wayland residents. And the majority of the respondents were, 68% were 55 and older. That blue is a little bit misleading. It's the aqua that represents the 47.7% for 65 and older. And as you might expect, most of these people didn't have any children living at home. And 64% were women who responded. I don't know why that is, men, but we asked people if sorry. Yeah. And we asked people, would they be willing to be updated or involved in some way? 47.7% said they would like to be updated on what we were doing, and 6.9% said they could contribute some time or expertise. And I want to thank everybody who took the time to respond to the survey. It was very informative for all of us and helpful. Now, Chris Hill, who will be the temporary editor, will be talking about what our plans are for the newspaper and the timeline.
Good evening, everybody. I need the mic. Hello, everybody. I want to thank everybody for coming and for listening and watching on Zoom and on Waycam. As June said, my name is Chris Hill. I'm a relative newcomer to Wayland. I've lived here for about 4.5 years with my wife, Sue, who's on the other end of the table. But I am from the Boston area. Soon after college, which I'm afraid to say was quite a number of years ago, I started working in journalism. I was actually working for a newspaper on the North Shore called the Danvers Herald. I worked for North Shore Weeklies, which was at the time a division of Fidelity. And I was then the editor of the Swampscott newspaper, the Swampscott Reporter. And then the company I was working for asked if we could start a new newspaper in Medford, and I was the first editor of the Medford Citizen. Like I said, all of that was a long time ago, and I moved on to other career paths, including technology and things like that. But I have to say, you've heard a few times how we're living in a newspaper desert right now when it comes to local news here in Wayland. And nothing brings that home more than what Sue and I experienced, which is that we moved here in the middle of a pandemic, right? There was no one, there really wasn't any institutional history that we had access to find out what was going on in town, what the history was in town, who was running the town. And it took a long time, and we decided more recently, we need to help be part of the solution of that problem. This community needs a newspaper. And we looked around, we saw other communities are starting newspapers. There are many examples of that. Concord is one example, but in Sudbury, in the town we came from, most recently Newton, it's not just Wayland that has seen the loss of newspapers. I mean, and a lot of that, of course, is because of the advent of the internet and technology, which has changed the way we all receive news. But even though we do have access to the internet, we don't necessarily have access to local information. What are our neighbors doing? Who's getting married? What are the kids doing on weekends? What's happening with the sports, with schools? And we really miss that. So we've decided, we decided to launch that survey, and we're working now with this fine group of people that you see up here to solve that problem. And just so you know, a lot of people have been asking us this, we've decided we're going to be called the Wayland Post, because not only is it an easy name to remember, it's easy to say and type into your web browser or say to your friends. It also evokes the notion of the Wayland Post Road and the history of this community. So that's the name we've settled on for now, and we hope you like it and tell all your friends about it. As June said, I'm working now, temporarily at least, as the new editor for this newspaper. And although we are starting only online today, we are going to be doing a print prototype of the newspaper very soon. And we're going to start showing that to people and distributing it. And eventually, we are going to mail this newspaper to every household in Wayland. That's the idea. And the reason we want to do that is because we think it's very important that this be a universal asset for the entire community, that it be something that's shared by everybody. It's a reference point for the entire community. So that is the Wayland Post. And now, on this slide, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're planning to do. There's a prototype available as of now, waylandpost.org, and I hope you all understand that it's just the beginning, that we are iterating, and we will improve the quality of that as we go along. And like I said, we will have a paper version of the paper very soon. In the beginning, just to get started, what we intend to do on this website and in general is do some news articles about local events, about local government, about major events that are happening. We're going to have a calendar of events, which will already covers town government activities and local sports, but we also want to open that calendar up to the entire community. So if you or people you know have events you want listed, you'll be able to add that event online, and it'll come to us for review, and we'll add it to the calendar when we can. We're also going to have a public safety log, so we're going to cover what the Wayland Police and Fire Departments are doing on a weekly basis. We're going to have summaries of town meetings, so obviously the select board and the school committee and the planning board, but even the design review board and the conservation commission and the historical commission. We want to allow people to start becoming connected to and seeing what sorts of activities those groups are involved in. We're going to have social announcements, birth announcements, engagements and weddings. We're also going to have obituaries, all the things that you think of when you think of the local newspaper and what you want to know that's going on in your town. We want to be your source for seeing that in print. We're going to have everything from school lunch menus to real estate transactions, what homes are being sold in your neighborhood, and also sports coverage, school sports, standings in the local leagues. That's important everywhere. And Wayland, as you all know, is very much a sports town, and we want to make sure that we are a part of that. We're going to have lots of photos, right? Every time there's an event in town, certainly a major event, we want to be there and give people a view of what's happening. Yes, there'll be lots of photos of kids because that's always popular, but everybody. It's really, we really want to cover the events that are happening in town in a thorough way. Eventually, we're going to start doing more, like any local newspaper. We want to have articles that cover all the major news in town. What's going on with the town meeting? Is there going to be an override? Where is your tax money going? What's going on with them hiring a new school superintendent? All of the articles that you think need to be covered, all the news you think needs to be covered, we intend to cover with articles and stories in the paper. We want to have an op-ed page that has your letters to the editor and guest opinion pieces. So we're going to open up those pages to the community so that they have a voice and a place where they can share their voice online and in print. We want to have interviews with interesting individuals in town. Wayland is a rich source of interesting people who have interesting histories, who are engaged in interesting activities. We want to do interviews and cover those folks. We want to have regional news and relevant news from neighboring towns. We want to have news and information about the climate, about the environment, about the water supply. As you all know, Wayland is a very wet community, so the waterways in this town matter a lot, and we want to cover that. We want to be open to having local groups participate and have gardening tips and other organizational news and information from the town. I am now going to let my friend Dave Watkins take over, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about financial stuff, how we're going to pay for all this.
Thank you very much. My name is Dave Watkins, and I've been in town since '94. All my kids were in the school system at one point in time, and had an opportunity to obviously be in some of the government infrastructure here, serving on a few committees, and actually I'm running a company in town. But this is an exciting project. It's going to cost us approximately $110, $120 per household to run a newspaper. That's really ultimately what it costs. And we have several ways we're thinking about achieving getting that type of money. So some of them are donations. So anybody that's excited about writing a check right now, we'd love to hear about that. But donations are an important part of this process, and really, it'll reflect on, the support for this. But we're also looking to develop people. So one of the things that we imagine is that there'll be not just volunteers, but paid for resources doing work on behalf of this newspaper. And we can develop the next generation of people who are writers and photographers and give them an outlet and opportunity to actually create their own experiences. We also believe that there'll be sponsorships and ads. There'll be ads in the form of local merchants. And what we're reflecting on is there's a lot of, even with the Concord Bridge, for example, there's a lot of local organizations that are actually taking out ads. And we've got a great demographic. We really do. It's obviously one of the wealthiest towns in the Commonwealth, and we've got a lot to offer anybody who's looking to advertise. We are also going to charge for things like obituaries, entries, weddings, birth announcements. Those will be things, and as well as legal announcements for the town. We're hopeful that those will be sources of revenue. But I think in general, as we think about securing and looking for help, we're going to be looking for some larger sponsors as well. So to create stability in this, there'll be a lot of cash that's needed to support it. We've set it up as a nonprofit organization. That doesn't mean we're not going to have a for-profit component in the future, but right now it is a nonprofit firm, which means that every single donation is tax deductible. Okay, which we think is very powerful for everybody who's looking to donate, because particularly with the end of money, if you happen to have a foundation or anything that you're a part of, this is the end of the year, and you're making sure all your donations are in. We will be funding staff, as I had mentioned before, and so that staff will create the quality levels that we need. Because part of the challenge of doing something like this is when it's just purely volunteers, it's not necessarily, there's not stability in it. And everything that we produce, we really want an editorial, an editor of some form focusing on, is it qualitative, is it accurate, people's names spelled correctly, are people's titles correctly, right, are dates correct? And we also expect to do things on a web, so the online environment is obviously less expensive than delivering things on paper. And I know paper is an interesting thing because we obviously have Facebook and all of these digital things. But one thing to reflect on is when COVID happened, we couldn't communicate to 25% of the town very well, right? There were a lot of older adults who didn't have the capacity to go out. They were probably most at risk, and we couldn't get things to their mailbox because they didn't want to go into their mailbox. So we think there's an opportunity to push papers out through the post and make them available to people and make them available to everybody so that there's some equality, which means that there's more money, because on a weekly basis producing a paper-based item as well as doing something on, and we also think that'll add to the opportunities of the revenue and the ad revenue and things like that. So a weekly paper arriving in your mailbox, anywhere from 4 to 20 pages is what we're anticipating, and that's just got a cost of about a little over $100 per household. Okay. So we're looking for volunteers. We're looking for people to help us support financially. If you're retired and are excited about running, if you've got children that have thought about being in, or journalism majors, journalism majors, we're really trying to give them something to do, right? Job opportunities for the summer, job opportunities during breaks, but really creating some career opportunities for people locally in town and covering local news. We want to make that fun for a group of participants. So if you've got it in you to be a participant and help us, we'd love to hear from you. Have a topic that you're interested in, we'd love to hear from you as well. And that website that you saw, we have, you'll see in a second, we've got a place that we'll be able to put in, there's a URL, but there's info@waylandpost.org. Waylandpost.org will be an email that we can receive. So this is actually the site. It's a little slow because of the internet here, I think. But this is a prototype of it. Remember, prototype, not the... So it's... yeah. I mean, it's real stuff, but it's a prototype. And this is the general idea of it, right? To be able to offer a lot of local content and make it available. So we also hope to not just make it completely about the government, right? So we're all interested in the government. It's an important part. We don't necessarily have the transparency we'd like to see, but we want to cover fun things too. Government is an important part of it, and we're hoping to use technology to make that more available and more readily available, more timely available to people in town. Any questions? Yes.
My name is Susie Klein, and I have a professional background in journalism, and actually eons ago wrote for the Crier on a freelance basis. And I think what you guys are doing is super, super important. So bravo for all the time and energy you put into it, and I think that looks really good. I have two comments. The easiest one first. Dave, you'll remember Dick Shea, the principal at the middle school, and I also moved to Wayland in '94, who said, we were talking about sort of what is Wayland's greatest product, in terms of what do we produce. And Dick Shea, a long retired middle school principal who was an awesome person, said it's our children. And so many of us here have kids who are in their 30s and 40s who are out doing remarkable things in the world. And I would just say, when you had the sports, I was like going, no, there's like so much more going on here amongst our children that's really important beyond the sports. So I think I would suggest early on that you broaden out beyond that. And then, so that was one thing. And my second thing is, and I just really questioned, I'm a big news devourer. I was just, slopping down my dinner over The Economist. And I question whether it's worth the expense, a paper version of The Economist, I should say. But I question whether, since so many of us have shifted to consuming our news online, if it's worth the expense to actually put it into paper, whereas wouldn't that money be better spent on getting quality staff who are really working on great stories? So I don't know the answer to that, but I'm just raising the question. Can you guys sort of repeat the question?
Yeah, so
That's really the question.
I guess the main question, if I may, that you're asking is just, is it
Paper versus print.
paper versus print? Is it worth the expense of printing this newspaper and distributing it, by the way, is a big part of it. And I guess, everybody's going to have different answers. One of the answers I would give is that it's actually, as it turns out, very hard to make money as a newspaper, as a periodical without print. That's where the advertising dollars are right now. When it comes to online advertising, if your corporate name doesn't start with Meta or Google, it's very hard to actually make a profit or to actually make the money to get the resources to do things. And it's amazing how much people miss print, especially for their local newspaper, because they miss seeing the photos, they miss being surprised by what they're seeing. And they miss their children and their families being in the habit of looking at newspapers instead of, surfing the web. I mean, you just admitted to just now that you were looking at the print. Well, now, but there might be two things in the future. We could be wrong. I am perfectly willing to be proved wrong, and we stop going to the expense of printing this as well. But to reach everybody in the community, to be a universal resource for everybody who lives in this town, for all 5,308 households, 880 households, I don't know how we're going to be able to do that right now without being in print. And I'll just say one really quick anecdote, because anecdotes aren't always very important, but my mom happens to live in Concord. She uses the internet to go look at her newspapers from her native France, because she can't get them otherwise. She looks at those websites. But it wasn't until she got in the mail the Concord Bridge for free in print that she ever thought about local news. She would never go online to look at local news. By putting it in print and sticking it in her mailbox, she put it on her kitchen counter, and she looks at it religiously every week. She gets excited about seeing it. She's an older woman, so yes, she prefers looking at the obituaries first. But she looks at everything in that newspaper. Nah, she's not there.
Major dailies that still provide a printed copy generally find it a major source of profit. Boston Globe is one of many. And as I wander around town early enough in the morning, I see a lot of copies of the Globe and, in my case, also the New York Times, because the habit of reading the news in print is well established, and almost anybody over a certain age will take to it very easily, I think. So there is a feasible economic model there.
Plus, it is a public service.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I totally agree with people as a member of the older generation that I like to have a paper copy in my hands. But I had a couple of comments. One is, I know this is a bit problematical, but I thought that perhaps some of your reporters might be gleaned from the high school population. Sometimes they're not too dependable, or they're, but I think that certainly the journalism students would be interested. The other thing is that I would really like to see in here a space devoted to, and I think you've mentioned this too, interesting people in town. Mm-hmm. You know, when I was working for the town crier, I had an awful lot of interesting people in town, like a guy who made ultra lightweight airplanes that he had to fly in salt mines in Poland, and I helped save a life because I got the ball rolling for somebody to get a kidney who really needed a kidney, and I still see him around town. And I just think that those sort of human interest stories, but maybe it could be just like 800 words a week, but where it would be every week in the same spot in the paper, so you would know to turn to that spot. Those are my comments.
Thank you.
Yeah, yes and yes. So, I mean, before this meeting started, it's Susan, right? I actually offered Susan a job at the paper because we should have her working with us. But I completely agree. I mean, I know the local high school newspaper is an award-winning publication. We very much want to work with those folks, include work by the students, photography, feature stories. There's no question that that's a resource that we want to take advantage of, but also bring the younger people into the fold. We want them. We very much want them. And I certainly agree about profiling interesting residents of the town. This weekend I was lucky enough to spend an hour or so with Rick Connard. I don't know if you folks know him. He works. Oh, he's here. Oh, Rick. Hey, Rick. And, I looked at this person and thought, I'm not doing him enough justice by just taking his picture to put in the newspaper. I want to write about this gentleman. I mean, he's had amazing experiences. He knows so much. And he's just one example of the kinds of people we want to profile in this newspaper. You know
remember,
Dave,
right,
right?
Dave?
It's funny, I also worked at the real paper 100 years ago.
Wow.
My name's Art Johnson.
Hi, Art.
And then I worked at Boston Magazine for many years, and then I worked for IDG for many years, and then I went to Boston University, where I ran external publications for many years. And so there are many years.
That's great.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Your name is Art Johnson?
Yeah, Johnke, J-A-H-N-K-E.
Art Johnson.
Sounds like too many years.
Yeah, it's 20 years. I think this looks great.
Thank you.
It's very pretty.
Well, actually, it's nice to get such a clear idea of what you're doing. What it is exactly what thousands of weekly newspapers in the United States used to be. Some of us are old enough to remember that. I worked for one when I was in high school before I went on to 40 years of professional journalism. So the weekly is a well-established thing and can be revived. Although recent evidence is that thousands of weeklies have died in recent years, but that shouldn't stop us.
And by the way, you know, you may not have time to be a true contributor, maybe an advisor. Please come forth.
I just wanted to make the comment. I do think paper is, for community news, is really a necessity just by the advertising revenue that it can generate. On the other hand, I was at a conference, it had to be 15 years ago, and the editor of the Times, New York Times, Bill Keller, was there. And this was when national newspapers had not embraced the web at all. And he made the statement that we're going in full-on designers, engineers, programmers, etc. And that's why they're so far. I mean, I read the Times every morning on the iPad, and it's an experience in terms of multimedia. I mean, nobody can compete with that level of dynamic professionalism. So, but deep pockets, of course.
Of course.
But you guys are not going to paper to expand readership. You're going to paper because that's where the ads are.
We're going to paper to get to every single person in the town of Wayland.
And advertisers want that.
And advertisers get excited about that, but that is true. At the end of the day, it's a nonprofit. So the experience here isn't about making $1 million, right? It's about, we want to fund it so that every single person gets it and it's self-sustainable.
Publications, and Susie, I think The Economist is one of them, where if you pay for an online subscription, you get the paper.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, they have segmented.
It's $10
You can
more.
do
It's
s- yeah.
$150
You
for
can go
the
straight online or.
online, or $160 for paper.
Good question at the back.
Yeah, really appreciate what you're doing, and I really like the font you chose for the Wayland Post. That is very nice, very clean, very clean, very modern. I'm wondering, June, I think it was you who said, you know, we don't have a welcome wagon. The days are long gone for a welcome wagon, so we want to have a newspaper to welcome people. And I wanted to pick up on that theme of welcoming. And I'm wondering, have you thought about how this newspaper can be a vehicle for making everyone in Wayland feel welcome and feel that they belong? So that maybe, you know, well, I'm just wondering what you're thinking about that. I'm not going to say what I think. Go ahead, I'd like to hear what you think.
And we've been hogging this microphone. Do you guys want to?
You want to say anything?
Well, you know, I said, you know, there was no source for me when I moved into a town. And yeah, I felt like if there was a newspaper going to every household, at least for new residents, it would be a way of them getting information.
Right, and I guess what I'm asking, I want to ask this without sort of giving away what I'm trying to say here, but, for example, not everybody who lives in Wayland is white, to be blunt. You know, have you thought about, and not everyone who lives in Wayland has, you know, English as, you know, they may speak other languages in their home. And so I'm wondering, you know, if I'm new to Wayland, and I'm, say, not white, or come from a new country, or you know, whatever it might be, how will you make me feel welcome here when I get this newspaper in my mailbox?
You know what's great about the online environment, right?
Oh, so Dave just mentioned, for those who couldn't hear, that you can also change the language when you're looking at things online. But I'm interested in what answer you're looking for. Like, what ideas do you have that we can use? Because this is something, actually, we've been so focused on just getting the basics up and running that we haven't really given thought to that. So I would be really interested to hear your ideas on how we can do that.
Right now, or having a separate conversation?
You can also email us. We have an email address, info@waylandpost.org. So, or we can have a conversation about it, because I think it is something that's important. I know the town is now doing a survey about being welcoming. Right, and even just reporting on what those results are, and then us trying to incorporate it into our practices would be really helpful. To be honest with you, there's so many things up in the air that we've been working on. We haven't really given thought to that. So
I'll just say one thing.
Sure.
And then I can write to you. But I was thinking, Metco families are part of this community. We are all Metco families, as they say. And so I was thinking, could you think about sending the newspaper, if it were welcome, and I don't know, whether it is or isn't, but to include Metco families, it's not that many more.
It's a good idea.
To send it to.
I think it's a great idea.
And then make sure that the pictures on the cover aren't always of the same people.
There's a question online, how are you getting families involved?
I get the hard ones. So the question is, how are we getting families involved? And again, this is something that we would have to work on. As you can see from people in the room, and even from the results of our survey, it's mostly people 50 and older who have been involved in this idea. We have tried to reach out to the schools. We'll continue to do so. Anyone who can help us with that would be great. It's hard when we're going to be looking for fundraising, and of course, PTOs and those groups are always looking for fundraising as well. So we don't want to present ourselves in competition with them, but we would love to work together with people. In terms of sort of a newspaper, we've met with people who are doing newspapers all over the region, and we met with the people at the Concord Bridge. And one reason they chose paper is because people wanted to show their children about reading a paper, like a paper, and to have it around on their kitchen counter, because, we all get stuff in email that just sits there, and then eventually you just go and delete it, and you don't read it. But this is on your counter, so, if you're sitting there waiting for your toast, you could just quickly look and read an article in there. So that is one way to get families involved, maybe get kids involved, especially if we have content from, the high school paper or something, get students involved. But we really have a lot of outreach to do in terms of families, and we would appreciate any help we can get.
Yeah, because this is.
Can I back? I just want to back up from one question about. I have sort of looked in the process of all the things we were looking at. Those translator buttons for what you have. If you run into somebody who can tell you that they've actually gotten a paper, or they're reading something where the translation actually works, because apparently it's slightly dicey. Like, you don't want to put the wrong thing in, and none of us are going to know whether it's the wrong thing unless we have someone else who can read it. So just as you're doing your business, if you can keep that in mind.
I was just going to say, just in terms of the families, content is king, right? And having photos and engaging people, and it's going to be really important, again, that we get donations and those will be helpful for us to really build the team to make this happen.
And again, if it's in French, families will keep it if it shows their kids at some nice thing. You already know how to do this. You put pictures and entertaining content.
Right.
I would just like to say, as somebody who one of the things my mom used to cut out was who was on honor roll. I don't know if they still
Oh yeah,
do that.
honor roll. We're gonna have those too. Yeah. So I think I hope you're all getting the impression and the understanding that we're just 5 people. We really want this to be a community resource. So not only do we want people's ideas, but we want their contributions. We want them to help us. If this newspaper has to be about families and accessible to everybody in the family, and we're looking to all of you for help to do that. It's not just going to be from the five of us. Oh, sorry.
Just one quickie. The high school, the journalism program they have, the photojournalism is fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, I do volunteer work at the Wayland Depot. They came over to the Wayland Depot. There was a gal with a video, somebody else writing it up. They did a terrific job, and they have it on their website.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that there could be some way you could try to invite these kids who are doing this photojournalism to submit things and then choose what might appear in the paper. Their parents would love it.
We agree completely, by the way.
Yeah, Susan, you wanted to ask a question.
Yes, I think I guess you're more than one Susan. Oh, I just want to applaud you for thinking of doing this. I moved from the Midwest. I'm a newcomer. So, newcomers can add a certain amount of perspective. And when I moved to Wayland, it was hard to get to move around and hear, what Wayland is all about. And I joined a lot of different activities, so I gradually kind of found my place here. But I came here because my kids were here. They went to Eastern schools, and I moved here. And one's in Wellesley, one's Weston, and I heard about the three W's. Wayland is one of those W's. And I've gotten to know people in these other two W's, and they have communication. They get things done, and that is communication not the most important thing in life, whatever you're dealing with. And so if we can communicate what Wayland is all about to each other and create that neighborly interested in each other attitude, I think that's the way to go.
We agree. Thank you.
Oh, so three things. One, do a story on the ESL program at the library to make people feel coming in from different countries feel more welcome. Weston is undergoing a similar initiative, and if you want, I can give you the name of a contact.
We know
there.
we're in touch with them.
Okay, great. And then
Joel's here. Joel's here.
Is Joel here?
Joel's here?
He was here, or you said he was going to be here. Anyway.
Sorry, go ahead.
And then the other thing I was going to say is, and again, I just hats off, totally applaud what you're doing. What I would suggest, though, is I think you need somebody who's got a deep knowledge, some institutional memory of the kinds of stories that have been covered and issues in the past here in town, who's helping advising you from an editorial standpoint. Because many of you who are talking editorial background don't have a long history of seeing stuff that have happened around town, and I just would hate for you to step into something unwittingly because you didn't know about sort of a long history of something.
I agree. Carole is some of that, but we always need more resources.
In this room, so.
Yeah. We always need more institutional knowledge as part of our work, part of our enterprise. I agree.
Emma Kieran, not enough credentials to say, probably. But
Credentials.
But I was wondering, obviously you have a lot of money to raise to get the paper print out, and I was wondering if you have a kind of timeline, maybe like soft launching online first, or what is that?
We did tonight. We're soft launching right now.
Yeah, sure.
He's the money guy.
Yeah, so we've got a couple things. So first, we're going to be prototyping it. We've got some cash right now that we're going to use to get the paper out into people's hands. We haven't picked the exact date when it's going to start, but we're going to get a weekly going so that people get a feel for it. We would like to get that cash flow in place over the course of the next 6 to 8 months. So if you know people.
You brought your wallet.
Thanks, Larry.
It's Venmo now.
Exactly, Venmo.
Do you plan to try to hit a large percentage of the population in the near future for donations?
We do.
Every single one.
We'd like to talk to everybody in town. And so the idea is the newspaper that we're going to publish will be to everybody in town.
What about grant money? I know there's a lot of competition for grant money, but
There is.
do you have a shot at grant money?
It's a little bit of a longer horizon, and I think that part of it is a lot of the grants start with, how long have you been doing this? Right? Yeah, right. So part of it is we've got to put some things out there.
One of the things we were tracking is came out of Dan Kennedy's book is there's like the Knight Foundation for the nonprofits. There's the Lion, or is it actually pronounced Lion? I don't know. LION. Yeah. That's also for the for-profit. So they're out there. But what's interesting is when you look at it, it's like there's a couple of major foundations that are really literally backing many of the smaller startups. So they're giving you enough money to get going, or they're trying to offer you advice about how to actually get started up with like a turnkey kind of operation. So it's out there, but I think, as Dave said, you've kind of got to have something to show before you can get anywhere.
I also sat in a conference for independent small newspapers, and they said there are a lot more organizations looking for money than what money's available. And they also said that the biggest source of income was looking to your own community and getting people that are interested in the community willing to contribute.
And I was just going to, this is just my thing. If you guys are still all getting circulars, I'm assuming from like supermarkets, so they still advertise in print, right? Because they come out on a certain day because there's going to be sales. People are still looking at those. I'm not exactly sure how we would work with that, but, you know, print is not completely dead. I have a little faith left in it.
We got something in the mail yesterday at my house. We got a 50-page print booklet from, guess who? Amazon.
Amazon has stores, they have actual physical stores.
Yes.
I have two questions. One, what's your Venmo? Do you guys have a Venmo?
I might make one right now.
Yeah, we'll actually post that.
Oh, okay, great.
Thank you.
And the other one was, you touched on something that I was just like, my jaw just dropped open for like 30 seconds. When you said somebody, a hedge fund, bought all the back issues of the paper.
Well, they didn't. When they bought the company, the town crier. So you might have heard that Chris was talking about Fidelity. Fidelity consolidated all the papers during the recession of the 80s, and it became the Community News Corporation. And that sort of got sold several times over, and it ended up with Gannett. And what happened was they combined Gatehouse Media, if you were following any of this, it came and got combined under Gannett. And as soon as it was that, Gannett, it's one of those. I will. I'm going to be corrected about that forever because I'm stuck on it. Once they had it in that private equity form, what they did, and it wasn't just them. There's the global. The Patch is another paper that's also owned and was spun off from private equity. It was AOL plus Alden Global, and they spun off the Patch. Where was I going with that one? But what they did is they fired everybody. So what the private equity were doing was they're selling off the properties that were used to publish the papers for real estate. So they basically decimated the papers and took the real estate. And all the histories with it. So it became intellectual property. When they bought the company, it belonged, all the paper work output, if you want to call it that, now belongs to that global private equity company.
And it's training your AI.
Yeah. So, and I can tell you, because the library will tell you this, is they're digitizing what they do have both on paper and in microfiche, but you have to negotiate a license, and even then you'll probably only be able to use it in the library.
Does the library have a print copy of Town Crier going back decades?
We have some paper and a lot of microfiche film.
Yeah. And the other place to find it is somebody donated all of their town criers when they moved to the Historical Society. So there actually is paper copies, but they're not in any one place.
Did you want to
Private
hear your answer?
equity firms have a plan to monetize the archives?
They're holding the archives hostage, basically. So the library has some print copies bound that are getting digitized and microfilm, but again, we can't publish it yet.
If you actually go upstairs, if you go upstairs, you have I believe it's from like 1960 to 1978 or 9. That's where I got the picture that's on one of these slides. I went up and took a picture of the book itself. And I also, just as a passing thought, when you go back through it, I'm just laughing because I do report on a lot of the board meetings. It's the same thing with different names. And you're like, oh no, it's still going on, right? For one reason or another. It's like capital planning, land use, school budgets, and people complaining about their taxes. So I guess it was both reassuring and kind of like sad at the same time to see that.
Anything else? Great. Thank you very much.